Hi, I'm Peter, and I'm a librarian. When I tell people about what it's like being a librarian, I like to say that it's not so different from when I was an intelligence analyst for the Navy. This may not feel obvious at first, but the core of both jobs is to help people find and understand the information they need to make informed decisions, and that's it. Granted, in the Navy, I worked with intelligence, that is, information that has military or strategic value, to help higher-ups make informed decisions, but my job wasn't to make those decisions. Rather, just to help them do that. As a librarian, I serve the public. You. I work with just about every form of information there is so that I can help patrons find information they need to make informed decisions, but again, I'm not here to tell you what decisions to make, I'm just here to help you make them. So, given this, one might say that I have a keen interest in understanding and fighting misinformation and disinformation. It seems like every year they both get a little bit worse, and honestly, fighting them is a never-ending battle, but we still can do something about it, and that's why I'm here today. I want to help you understand three things: what misinformation and disinformation are, how they work, and what you can do about it. Now, before we get into misinformation and disinformation, we gotta have a working definition of information itself. This actually isn't super easy for the reasons that are best left at the door for now, but for today's purposes, we can think of information like this. Information is an idea of something that starts in the mind that one person tries to send to another. We use things like writing and talking to share those ideas, but the writing itself isn't the information, it's more like a box that we use to hold it when we want to give it to someone else. And just like mail, sometimes that message gets to the other person in perfect shape, and sometimes you wonder just how many times they dropped that box before it got to you. There's a lot more to it, of course, and if you want to learn more about information broadly, come see me after class, but this should be enough to get us started. Any questions? If so, leave them in the comments below. Now, let's talk about misinformation first. It's actually pretty simple. Misinformation is just information that's wrong or misleading, but not necessarily on purpose. An easy way to remember this is to think of another word that starts with mistake. When you mistake one thing for another, it might just be an accident. Sometimes capital I's just look like lowercase l's, and sometimes it's on purpose. A certain news corporation's slogan was fair and balanced all the way from 1996 to 2017. What a coincidence. So that's misinformation. Disinformation, on the other hand, is where things get a little intense. It's a pun, just stick with me for a second. Disinformation is also information that's wrong or misleading, but on purpose. So whereas misinformation could be accidental, disinformation always intends, there it is, to mislead. To help you remember, here's a fun little mnemonic that I've come up with. Misinformation can be a mistake. Disinformation can be a disaster. I love it. So this intent that I keep mentioning behind disinformation, what is it? Well, there's actually a few different ways that we see it. Above all, people use disinformation to mislead or to confuse. That means that there's some true thing out there that someone doesn't want you to know about or pay too much attention to. So they'll put an idea out there that contradicts the truth or hides it. Disinformation is also used to persuade. That is, someone's trying to get you to buy into their idea of what's true or right. Once they've persuaded you, you're more likely to do something they find favorable and less likely to question future information they send your way. That could be voting a certain way, or buying a certain product, or supporting certain causes. We also see disinformation used to distract. So if everyone's so consumed with calling out something you've done that's obviously bad, happening over there, they may be too distracted to see that equally horrible thing you're doing over there. To quote, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." Bonus points if you can name that quote. Fourth, and related, emotion's a powerful tool. Getting people to feel big emotions makes them less likely to think critically about something. Telling people that their freedom is under attack will make them more receptive when you give them suggestions on how to protect it. And likewise, a feel-good story that seems like it could be true can make people feel like the source is more trustworthy. And finally, disinformation divides. Lately, political divisions have gotten real bad, y'all. Like, to the point where sometimes it seems like the people we're talking to live in a completely separate reality from us. That's not an accident, and it's used in two different ways. First, convincing people that they have an enemy in another group of people can stir up a sense of community around a cause, specifically fighting that enemy. It also makes them less receptive to what the other side has to say. and this in turn increases your control over them. Second, divide and conquer's real, y'all. We know that other governments spread disinformation on social media to divide Americans because the US does a lot in a lot of places and people don't really like that. The more that Americans are at each other's throats, though, the less likely they are going to be involved in global affairs. So, when we talk about how disinformation has intent, those are some examples of what we mean. Now, what do we do about it? Lucky for us, once you know what goes into disinformation, you know what to look for, which is the first step in fighting it. So when you find something suspicious, here are some questions to keep in mind. First, how does what you're reading or seeing make you feel? If you start feeling all riled up because of the language or imagery it uses, ask yourself, does a reliable source of information need to make you angry to get its point across? Second, where did you hear it from? I mean this in the kindest way, but Aunt Judy or Steve from work probably didn't do any research before they shared that meme. If they did, they might realize that what they just shared began its life on a now deleted account, and that account was probably deleted because it was fake. Third, who said this first? We may feel inclined to trust statistics if the image has a source associated with it, but there are two things to be careful with here. First, is that the actual source, or did someone just put that name on it to make it sound authoritative? And second, is the organization itself what it claims to be? So here's one of the best examples. The American Academy of Pediatrics is the actual professional organization focused on pediatric health, has 67,000 members, and has existed since 1930. Whereas the American College of Pediatricians, on the other hand, has only been around since 2002, has approximately 500 members, and pushes anti-LGBT and non-scientific stances and treatments that are widely recognized as harmful and actually illegal in many places. So, do with that what you will. Fourth, regardless of where the information is coming from, it never hurts to ask, what's the agenda behind this? If a social media CEO goes to Congress and says, oh yes, privacy matters, there is a problem, and we welcome more regulation, while then quietly giving money to the politicians who believe government is already too big, that should tell you something. But hey, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. And finally, ask yourself this, what's not being talked about? The most effective disinformation isn't all just made up, it's actually mostly true, but it's rarely the whole picture. It'll only present the facts that support a particular viewpoint. The goal is that their targets, you, will just take it at face value, or just do enough digging to verify that the statements are true. And since strong emotions help root ideas in our brains, these become harder for people to overcome later, even when they're revealed as misleading or manipulative on purpose. So, now that you know what to look for, you can do something about it. And sometimes, the easiest thing to do is nothing. The buck can stop with you. Whether it's a meme or a rumor or something interesting you heard from a friend or someone, you don't have to pass it on. One and done, y'all. If you do want to take a more active role, though, sometimes the best way to deal with misinformation that others believe is to have an honest-to-goodness conversation with the people you know. We all kind of expect at this point that talking to strangers online about controversial topics will go south real quick, and I don't really recommend trying that. But in person or over Zoom or on the phone, maybe Aunt Judy's going to be more receptive. And incidentally, social isolation makes people more susceptible to misinformation. So focus on the people you know and who you're invested in. If you do this, though, remember, the person that you're talking to isn't the problem, it's their beliefs. And they hold those beliefs in part because they've been the target of billion-dollar disinformation campaigns, as we all have. It takes patience, and you probably won't see results immediately, but do your best not to accuse. Instead, try asking questions. Why do you think XYZ? How did you learn about that? What's your personal experience with this been like? How do you think XYZ person feels? The goal here is to get people to think more in depth about things that perhaps they've only taken for granted up to now. And my final piece of advice is this. Be curious. The world is big and scary, sure, but also really interesting. And when you get into the habit of asking why things are the way they are, you'll start to have a better understanding of how things work and have an easier time doing, well, just about anything. And when you get to a question that you don't know how to answer, call now. Trained librarians are standing by. We're not here to tell you what decisions to make. We're just here to help you make them. All right, that's all I got. Thanks.